So we see lots of women in the clinic, mostly around from about the age of 35, and they're coming with a lot of specific reasons. But one of the main reasons why they might come to us is because of the inability to lose weight, which is something that they may not have ever had an issue with before. And we always see and hear lots of women say, you know, in the past I could go on a diet or I could go to the gym and weight would come off me really easily, and now it doesn't matter how much I work out, it doesn't matter how well and healthily and well I eat, I can't lose weight. And we have identified, and I want to talk about maybe 3 or 4 reasons why women do struggle to lose weight today. There's a lot of hormonal changes that happen around this time. So there's a very, very strong hormonal component that happens around this time, leading up to, often after having children and leading into those perimenopausal years.
Awesome. So I'm just getting the screen up, but as we go through it, let's talk about the 2 big things, right? So I think what makes you really different is the fact that, you know, you worked across a lot of clinics that dealt exclusively with hormones, looked a little bit deeper into hormones beyond what the doctors did. And a lot of the patients weren't getting results, which is a big reason why we're sitting here having the conversations. A lot of patients they'll go to the doctor tells them to eat a specific diet, and then they go to, maybe they'll go and see a naturopath, or they'll go and see an integrative doctor. And then they really are only looking at their hormone reference ranges. So the big thing I want you to talk about is why it's important to look beyond just hormones, because you might lose, like for me, I lost a few kilos, but like we needed to do more than just the hormones in the beginning. So what are the 2 key drivers? Obviously hormones being one, and looking beyond what you get in standard blood work, but what's the other one? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so gut health and gut microbiome is a huge one as well. So the main things that we need to look at, and I do want to touch on one of the reasons why a lot of people go to doctors and don't necessarily get their answers, and then that's how they end up coming to see us. The main reasons, we've got your thyroid hormones, your reproductive hormones, specifically estrogen and estrogen dominance, insulin and insulin resistance, adrenal hormones and cortisol, and gut health and the gut microbiome. Of course, we need to look at what people are actually eating and what their lifestyle is like, but most people are eating, it's often not what they're eating, it's often not what their lifestyle is. They're the main 5 or so key reasons why people do struggle to lose weight.
Awesome. So let's talk about gut. So what specifically, so a lot of things that aren't getting addressed in other clinics, really, and I've been hearing it a lot, like we have patients who've been going to clinics who've seen other naturopaths. Like right now, we've got at least 5 patients I can think of off the top of my head that have seen lots of other different practitioners, and they have never actually had anybody look at their inflammatory markers in the gut microbiome. So can you talk a little bit about how the gut drives hormones and why it won't allow, you know, the weight to just fall off if it's driving the hormones to be unbalanced?
Yeah, so I actually studied mainstream medical science, and when we studied gut health, it was all about digestive diseases, and then we would study hormones, and it was all about hormonal conditions, and then we studied naturopathic medicine, and it was all about how everything stemmed from the gut. But because I was I came from quite a scientific mind and quite a scientific background, I couldn't find any research on this until I got into practice, and then I was like, oh, everything does start with the gut. And ever since 2017, approximately, an immense amount of research has come out linking the gut microbiome to so many different diseases and conditions, including the inability to lose weight or the ability to lose weight. One big study did actually come off the back of an Olympic runner. So she got quite sick and she needed antibiotic medication, very, very high dose antibiotics. And because she had so many antibiotics, the only way to reinoculate her gut and heal her gut from that was to do fecal transplant therapy. So she went through a gastroenterologist and she did fecal transplant therapy, and the perfect donor for her. Why are you laughing?
Because it just sounds crazy, you know, to think that you got to get your poo, you got to get somebody else's poo in there to get you to lose weight again.
No, I mean, when I first heard of this, I thought that's just that's just bizarre. But they're doing fecal transplants to heal all sorts of things: autism, cardiovascular conditions, metabolic conditions. It's really, really, really fascinating when you really get down to it. So I know, and a lot of people, I talk to my husband about it sometimes. I'm like, oh my God, like I come home with all this cool information about fecal transplants, and he's like, la 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 la, don't, like, that's disgusting. And I think I just talk about it like it's second nature now. I don't even think about it, but I know when you actually do think about it, it's quite funny. But they found the perfect donor for this Olympic runner, who happened to be her cousin, who happened to be 30 pounds more than what she was. And this Olympic runner ended up gaining 30 pounds to the same weight that her cousin was. And off the back of that, they then studied rats. And I think they're now studying more humans in this. And then they're doing a lot of weight loss therapy using fecal transplant therapy from skinnier people into people who do need to lose weight. So there's a few bacteria that are linked to the way our body metabolizes sugars, carbohydrates, and also releases insulin. So there's a very, very strong connection between the bacteria and the microbes in our gut and insulin. The other thing as well is that if there is any leaky gut can cause excess inflammation. And where there's excess inflammation, that affects the way our body stores onto fat, and it also affects, it's kind of like the precursor to everything. It affects the way estrogen is metabolized, and if there's excess estrogen, that will affect weight loss. It affects the way our thyroid hormones are converted. So 20% of our thyroid hormones are converted in our gut. So if there's any inflammation, leaky gut, or dysbiosis being a fancy word for an imbalance in the microbes in our gut, that will affect the way our thyroid hormones are converted. So everything really does start with the gut.
Yeah. And I just put up quite a funny little diagram here, because what ends up happening is women go from, the 35 and they have this nice little waistline. And can you just talk about, like, hormonally, something actually happens as we get older, right? So when we hit about 40, can you talk about what's happening with progesterone and why women actually get this sort of larger shape, just quite briefly, just so people can understand what's physically happening with the body?
Yeah, and also, so our estrogen levels and our progesterone levels they're going up and down all the time, and that's going to affect the way that our body stores onto fat, and also where throughout our body it stores onto fat, because of those immense hormonal changes. But historically as well, like, we've got to look at what historically, when we go into menopause, when we look back a few hundred years ago, menopausal women, they weren't working. They were at home. They were potentially with their grandchildren. They were, doing it, like managing the house, managing the food. Everything was very community based, and they naturally were slowing down. But now, when you look at perimenopausal women, they're not necessarily slowing down. Perimenopausal women are potentially career orientated, work is vamping up, kids are off and kids have left home, and now they're working a lot, very, very, very high stress. And historically, that's not naturally what we are. So that's going to affect all of our reproductive hormones. It's going to affect our adrenal hormones. And as a natural coping mechanism, we pad up and we start gaining a lot of padding, and we start gaining weight, because we're not doing what we have been designed and historically are doing.
So let's talk a little bit about estrogen. So can you go into what would it look like if estrogen is driving the weight gain? So whether they're perimenopausal, whether women on here are perimenopausal, or they're suffering from, something related, like I wasn't perimenopausal, but I had really high estrogen. So where is it stored? What does it look like? What's it feel like if estrogen is out of whack?
Yeah, so estrogen, like we've written here, estrogen does store in fat tissue. So when we are exercising, eating well, it does prevent fat tissue breakdown. It's also manufactured and detoxified mostly through the liver. And if there's any sluggishness in that phase 1 and phase 2 liver detoxification, that is going to cause that excess surge, or that it does prevent estrogen detoxification, so it makes estrogen store in the body. So we need to look at liver health as well. Signs and symptoms of estrogen excess, like the biggest giveaway is swollen and tender breasts leading up to the menstrual cycle. So that's probably the main symptom of estrogen excess. moodiness, PMS, people who do have PMS, changes to the menstrual cycle, heavy periods, menstrual clotting, mood changes, period pain, fatigue, fluid retention, particularly around the face. And they tend to hold, they sort of tend to hold the excess weight around the breasts, the arms, the bum, and the legs.
And what age do you typically start seeing estrogen being a driver of weight gain? Is it just because women have given birth? Like, is it because they have it? When does it pop up because of like a genetic response, or what do you typically see as either an age or even like something else that's driving the estrogen to cause the weight gain?
Yeah, I actually see estrogen from teenagehood. It does get worse, or should I say, I see it more in people who are, later 30s, 40s, perimenopausally, or before perimenopause, sorry, whether that's because they come to us because of that. But yeah, throughout the whole life, estrogen, like I said, we've got to look at liver. We've got to look at, what things are their xenoestrogens, what things have they been growing up on that's been affecting their liver, for that to cause that estrogen dominance.
Okay. Now, the other thing you mentioned, which is fascinating, and we talk about thyroid a lot, and we're going to talk about, I need to ask you way more questions on thyroid pause, because it is something that literally we've had about 20 people ask specifically, why are they gaining more weight? Why can't they lose weight, especially after menopause or during perimenopause? So we're going to get to that in a second. I want you to talk through the undirective thyroid, because this is a big one. Can you explain it from a metabolic perspective and how it's actually affecting metabolism, and talk through the reference ranges so people have an understanding of why thyroid hormones might be going on even though they think they're normal?
Yeah, so metabolic. So your thyroid is a butterfly-shaped gland that sits here, like in the picture. It's your pituitary gland, which is a gland up in your brain that produces thyroid-stimulating hormone, or TSH. This is the hormone that is generally only tested, and unless that hormone is out of range, they don't go on and test the other thyroid. They very rarely, should I say, go on and test the other thyroid hormones. This is a thyroid-stimulating hormone, so it literally stimulates your thyroid to make thyroid hormone T4. T4 is inactive, and T4 has to convert to T3, and T3 is the active hormone. So T3 is the hormone that controls the speed of every single metabolic pathway in the body. The speed of your metabolism, reflexes, thought, menstrual cycle, heart rate, blood pressure, thermostat. And then under adrenal stress or acute infection, but usually stress, T4 will potentially convert mostly to a hormone called reverse T3. So if reverse T3 is elevated, reverse T3 blocks the function of the active hormone. So if we're looking at a blood test result, and if I see on a blood test result, T3 looks normal or looks good, but I don't know what reverse T3. So if that patient says to me, oh, I'm stressed, and they've got a very strong history of stress, and I can see that they've got good free T3, and I don't know what the reverse T3 is doing, that's something that we need to investigate, because if reverse T3 is elevated, it actually blocks the function of the thyroid hormone T3 from getting inside the cell and doing its job. We actually, when it comes to thyroid hormone testing, we really, really, really need to be like detectives. We cannot just go off a thyroid hormone panel, partly because only 18% of our thyroid hormones are in our blood. So that's all that's tested. But there are so many factors that will affect those thyroid hormones from getting from the blood inside the cell and working at the cellular level. Factors include estrogen dominance. So if there's excess estrogen, which we've briefly spoken about, that actually binds to the thyroid globulin binding protein, which is basically the hormone, the binding protein that takes the T3 and inserts it in the cell to work at the cellular level. We've got nutritional deficiencies that can prevent it from getting inside the cell and working at the cellular level. Like I said before, gut microbiome and liver. 20% of this happens in the gut microbiome, 80% in the liver. So if there's gut issues going on or liver issues going on, this is going to affect it. Heavy metal toxicity, things like that. So there's a lot of things that affect and can cause or can be attributed to an underactive thyroid.
So it sounds like you've got a couple different things going on in one go. So like, it sounds like estrogen dominance or estrogen can pop up, the liver can be slowing it down, or if you've got inflammation in the gut microbiome. But the thyroid in the testing, just the fact that only 18% gets tested, that's actually found in the blood. We just had an email pop through literally last night, right? So I'm going to put it on the spot here. And a patient actually had her thyroid antibodies tested, and she's been to multiple doctors, and they had never actually tested her thyroid antibodies. She's gaining weight. She's exhausted. She's not getting anywhere. Sure enough, you actually tested something that the doctors don't ever test. And tell us a little bit about her without obviously disclosing her information, because it's a very fresh patient, but now she's actually got a proper diagnosis as to what's been going on. So can you talk a little bit about that, just briefly?
Yeah, my heart goes out to that lady. I need to go over her notes again. I think she's been trying to get to the bottom of this since she's had children. Her children are teenagers. I'm pretty sure she gained a lot of weight, and has been utterly fatigued since having little kids, babies, and a few toddlers. I think she's got 3 kids, and now they're all teenagers. So that's maybe a good 12 or 15 or 16 years that she's been struggling with this, and she has never been tested. And she said to me, yes, my thyroid has been tested, and doctors told me it was all fine. She's had lots of stool tests and lots of stool testing through her GP, and everything was all fine. And then I sent her off to do a specific stool test and a specific thyroid. I tested all of the thyroid markers, and it came back with her thyroid hormones being within range. Mostly, like within range, but not optimal, but within range to the mainstream, to doctors, not to a naturopath, and really high antibodies. Like, the antibodies were, I wouldn't say dangerously high, but like etching on dangerously high. Like, if left untreated, once she hits menopause, and I think she's almost there. Once she's hit menopause, it's not going to be fun for her. And sadly, I see this a lot. Like, sadly, I see lots of patients who said, oh no, my GP said my thyroid's fine, and then we do extensive testing and it's not. And look, don't get me wrong, I have a lot of respect for doctors and the mainstream medical system.
Hit the wrong button, sorry.
That's okay. I was like, did I do something wrong? Did I say something
wrong?
You're
doing
anything wrong. Stop talking.
No, you're perfect. So she's really common. So let's talk a little bit about, I want to get into thyropause a little bit, because we are talking about thyroid. So I'm just going to pop open. Can you see the thyropause screen on your end, or no, it's gone now?
No.
Okay, I'm going to pop it open now. So let's talk a little bit about what happens during thyropause. Can you see it now? Yeah. So let's talk a little bit. Can you see the thyropause screen? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about why this. So this is fascinating. I do a lot of the research around a lot of the stuff we're talking about, and I actually see the patient cases, and then I come back and I'm trying to pull all the research together. So what's really common is around 38 to 43, these women are gaining loads of weight, or they like dwarf into this different person from a mental perspective, or they get to, some women are very lucky, they get to 47, 48, or they'll very few get into menopause and then just can't shift weight. And it's often triggered because of thyropause. So can you talk through what is happening with the thyroid? Why is the thyroid hormone even involved? Because everybody thinks peri-menopause is just, estrogen and maybe progesterone, because they all get put on birth control. So what is insulin resistance, and first let's start with thyroid, and then we'll talk a little bit about how it's happening with insulin resistance. Then we'll talk a bit about insulin resistance.
Yeah, so I mean, like we've got here, thyroid can decline even by 2% perimenopausally, and a decline by just 2% or just 3% or just 5% will significantly increase symptoms such as weight gain, fatigue, mental fogginess, etc. We do generally have an estrogen dominance picture. And like I said before, the estrogen will affect the way that the thyroid hormones can get from the blood inside the cell. There's a massive... did you want me to talk about insulin resistance? I'll briefly talk about it, because
we'll go into insulin in just a second, because it's a big driver. But talk about the difference between thyroid and insulin, because a lot of women come in saying, oh yeah, that sounds just like thyroid. Like, tons of people are like, oh yeah, that just sounds like hypothyroidism. But there's a very big difference, especially when it hits to this point, when it's estrogen dominance mixed with thyroid. Then it being thyroid only mixed with perimenopause versus insulin resistance and perimenopause?
Yeah, and exactly, like it all gets mixed up because all the symptoms are very similar. You know, there's hair fall, there's brain fall, there's low concentration, there's the fatigue, there's the joint pain. That's huge. Joint pain is really big. There's that increased level of inflammation, and all the symptoms all kind of get jumbled up, but it all actually is overlapping. And you cannot have it's not actually ever segregated. You can't have a healthy thyroid when you've got reproductive hormonal imbalances, or when you've got gut issues, or when there's adrenal issues. And you can't have healthy reproductive hormones if you've got a thyroid issue. They all work very, very closely in with each other. But there's a very, very most women are diagnosed with thyroid issues menopausally, postmenopausally, or perimenopausally.
Wow. So how does insulin change? So let's talk a little bit about insulin now. So I'm going to just pop back because we can come back to this, but in terms of actual insulin, which this is totally relevant, I'll let you talk about Carol in a second. In terms of insulin resistance, what makes insulin resistance weight gain different? And when does it typically kick in?
So there's an increased risk of insulin resistance from about the age of 40. Basically, insulin resistance is a disease that builds up over years and years and years of certain dietary and lifestyle practices. So what it is when we eat carbohydrates and sugar, our pancreas secretes insulin. Insulin attaches to a carbohydrate molecule and takes that carbohydrate molecule inside the cell to be utilized in the energy pathways. Where there's insulin resistance is insulin secretes from the pancreas, binds to a sugar molecule, but the cells are already full of sugar already. So there's no room. The insulin can't take any more sugar inside that cell. So what happens is a layer of fat wraps around that molecule of sugar, and it stores mostly around the middle for later use. So that's, in simplistic terms, what insulin resistance is.
And why does it kick in around perimenopause? What is happening with the hormones that's getting it to really start to kick in during this period?
Thyroid controls a lot of that. I think there's a few different reasons. So thyroid is a big part of controlling that and controlling the release of the insulin, and also the burning of the sugar molecules inside the cell. So if that's not burning optimally, then there's no room for more sugar to enter inside the cell, which is a contributing factor to it. The other thing as well is, like I said, it's a disease that can take 10 to 20 to 30 years to actually develop, or should I say a condition that can develop over, it's not something that can develop over 12 months. It's something that takes a while to develop. So by the time it's developed, people are, a little bit later in life, generally speaking, not always, but generally speaking.
Yeah. So one of the things that I thought was really worth talking about is, how do you know that it's insulin resistance versus just the slow thyroid hormones? Because it seems to be a big question, especially around these sort of menopausal years when we're starting to see more and more insulin resistance come through. So can you talk a little bit about the zone of misery here?
I love that term. I worked with someone that used that term, the zone of misery, and I thought it was so good. So such a good catchphrase. So basically, what happens is, and we all understand, like we can all just by reading that and hearing that, the zone of misery, we all get it. Sometimes I do it. I mean, I'm a mum and I don't sleep very much, but when you go into a room and you can't remember why you're going into that room, or you open the fridge and you're like, what did I want from this fridge? Or you're talking to someone who you may have known for 5 years and you can't for the life of you remember the name of that person. You just completely go blank. So that's what the zone of misery. So what tends to happen is we just our mental comprehension just crushes. So what we do as natural human instincts is we grab for either sugars, starches, or stimulants to kickstart our brain out of that zone of misery, usually sugar and carbohydrates. So we're grabbing the sugars to kickstart ourselves out of that zone of misery, which gives us an insulin spike and a blood sugar spike, and it gives us a bit of a kick. But then because we've got that sudden kick, then we crash again, and we just repeat this cycle where we're grabbing things, and then this causes a cascade of blood sugar dysregulations, and then we have to grab for more for more sugar to get ourselves out of that zone of misery again, and then our energy crashes, and it's like a snowball effect. So that's probably a big sign, along with that mental fogginess, that fatigue, that weight gain. people who have thyroid issues don't tend to do that as much. So, but I mean, like I said, insulin resistance and thyroid like often go hand in hand. Like a lot of people have both. But people who don't really have the insulin resistance as much, they've more got thyroid issues going on. They don't tend to go to crash and then grab for sugar and then crash and then grab for sugar. They don't tend to do that as much.
Yeah. So let's talk about what we do a little bit different, and then let's wrap up so we can try and help keep it short because we can go over sometimes. So in terms of the treatment process at the clinic, so a lot of times, a lot of people lately, especially, have gone to the doctor and they've only had an experience with a doctor. Some have worked with other naturopaths, and unfortunately, a lot of practitioners aren't going to the depths looking at not only gut microbiome but hormones, and also nutrient markers and metal and mineral markers to figure out what's going on. So can you talk through what makes our treatment process so effective and why our patients are able to, we're seeing patients get results with weight, with periods, with like mental clarity within 3 to 4 weeks. So can you talk through what it is that we do? I've just put a little graphic here, but you please talk through it and talk through how the practitioners are working through it.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons why a lot of people don't get any results from going to a doctor, and I have so much respect for doctors, don't get me wrong, but they literally spend minimum 6 years or 8 years of their lives studying how to identify life-threatening diseases and conditions, how to keep someone alive, what to do if someone in front of them is having a heart attack or collapsed lung. Or so if you have a life-threatening disease or condition, or if you've got terminal cancer and you need chemotherapy, or if you've cut yourself really bad and you need stitches, or if you need a diagnosis of a condition or a disease, it's exactly where you need to be. But most people experience a set of symptoms and they don't necessarily have any serious diagnosable condition going on. It's usually maybe they've got an undirective thyroid or insulin resistance, but it's not serious, but they have a lot of symptoms. So they go to the doctor. Let's just say they've piled on the weight and they're not sleeping, so they go to the GP. I don't know what's wrong with me. I'm not sleeping. I've stacked on 20 kilos and maybe they've got a thyroid issue and they're on thyroxine. Doctor runs some blood test results and says, yeah, you're on thyroxine, your thyroid hormones are fine, eat less, exercise more, here, have a sleeping tablet, maybe you're depressed as well, have an antidepressant, off you go. And then a couple of years later, this time you're back at the doctor again because you've got really bad joint pain. And then the doctor's like, yeah, no, your blood test results are normal, everything's within range, off you go, and take some painkillers and off you go. And then a couple of years later, something else, and then 5 or 10 years later, you've got another set of symptoms, you go back to the doctor's office and you're diagnosed with a condition. But we have been gifted with this amazing thing that our body does. It gives us symptoms. Our body speaks to us. It gives us a symptom. It tells us that something is out of balance and we need a little bit of attention. So yes, in our clinic, we can treat people with we see lots of very chronic complex cases, but we also see a lot of people who they don't have anything diagnosed or not much anyway, but they've got a lot of symptoms. So we look at diagnosed states, but we also look at symptoms as well. And I think as well, we have been grown up in a culture, and I know I can't speak for everyone, but I know I have been raised to push through. You have a symptom, just push through. When I was a kid, I remember having a headache and mum would be like, no, you're going to school, take a Panadol, drink water and off you go to school. And it happened a lot. Or I had, really bad period pain and my mum would be like, no, you're not taking any time off school, take a painkiller. So I was raised to just always band-aid things and move on. And we have been grown up and raised in a culture to always give a band-aid approach. And we can band-aid things with over-the-counter medication, with prescription medication. We can even band-aid things with naturopathic and natural therapies as well, which there's a time and a place for that, and we do that. We kind of in our clinic go in with a double-pronged approach. So we can go in with a bit of symptomatic support, so we can help our patients with their symptoms. We can give them things to support their sleep, for example, or to support their energy, which is great and it works. But the reason why our patients 3 months or 6 months or potentially even 12 months down the track walk away with awesome results is because we can dive deeper, figure out what's going on underlying, and treat that person from the root cause. So what tends to happen, people come in, we do an initial consultation, we might send them off with some with some things to help lift their energy levels or to help with their sleep or deal with their stress. And we also might refer them for further testing to really figure out what's going on underlying and why they're experiencing XYZ symptoms or why they might have XYZ condition. We'd send them off for further testing, we'd bring them back, we'd go over their test results, and then we would treat the cause of what's going on with them and then hold their hand throughout the course of their whole treatment. And that's why most of our patients, within 3 months or 6 months, we've been able to get on top of what's going on with their thyroid hormones or their reproductive hormones or their insulin resistance or their gut microbiome issues or their adrenal issues.
Awesome. And if you could wrap it up, and if you could give people like three points on, if they're gaining weight, what is not normal, right? So like a lot of women gain weight, and the common thing I'm hearing is a lot of women might go onto keto and it takes a month before they start losing, or they stop for a day and it comes back with a vengeance. Or another thing that we hear a lot is they'll go onto the Shake It programs, and it's the only thing, like they're on the shakes and that's the only thing that works. Or a lot of women are doing, a lot of women are basically going into like diet restriction, or they're actually dieting, but they're not losing weight. So when is it what are some of the, what are 3 things people really need to watch out for, and what can they actually do about it for them to know that it's not that you're eating too much anymore?
Yeah, so if you're gaining weight and you haven't changed your diet, or if you're eating really well and healthy, if you started eating really well and healthy and potentially exercising, and I actually don't like talking too much about exercise because we see a lot of people with adrenal issues and I don't want them to exercise too much. So that's another topic. So I'm not going to talk about exercise right now, but if you're eating well or you're gaining weight for absolutely no reason, if you're fatigued, if you particularly gain weight around the middle, that's not normal. The other thing as well is a body that is healthy and is within balance, you should be able to have a glass of wine occasionally or a piece of birthday cake occasionally without it blowing everything out. Like I talk to people all the time who, like if they have 1 glass of wine, they wake up the next morning and they're a kilo heavier. Or if they have, it just blows everything out. That's not actually normal. That's a sign that something's out of balance. And I'm not saying to go and have wine regularly and go and eat cake regularly and eat a bowl of pasta all the time. But if you can't do things like that occasionally, that means that something is out of balance.
And what are some things that, obviously people can come and talk to us, like we have a free consultation that's available to people. What would you say is the best? What would you say is a combination of symptoms with the weight gain that would let them know that they need to talk to us? Or at what point would someone get to the point where they really need our help if they're not getting it, from their doctors or from their current practitioners?
Yeah, the main symptoms that we see, and the main symptoms that we sort of spoke about before, which is, can be a crossover for a lot of things, is weight gain, fatigue, poor sleep, mental fogginess, forgetfulness, and poor concentration. So they're the main core symptoms that overlap with a lot of hormonal issues. Yeah, I don't actually I very rarely talk to people whose only symptom is weight gain. And if it is, it's usually a dietary thing. If there's fatigue associated with it, poor sleep associated with it, mental fogginess associated, if there are other symptoms going on, it's usually not a dietary thing. And yes, there's a lot of diet therapy we can do to help, but it's usually an underlying hormonal issue.
And what does it look like when it's a gut issue?
A lot of bloating, potentially IBS symptoms, constipation, diarrhea. Bloating is like, some people will go to the bathroom regularly, they don't have any issues, with no constipation, no diarrhea, but wherever there is bloating, there's something out of balance there. So that's the main symptom, but it could also be constipation, diarrhea, reflux. Yeah,
I just talked to a lady yesterday, and she literally, not only does she have bloating and diarrhea, but she is packing on weight, on. And the doctors have told her the only way for her to get better is to eat less. And as it is, she barely is eating, because she's afraid to eat because the diarrhea is so painful and she's getting so bloated. So Yeah, so all of that really resonates. So anything you
Yeah.
want to add before we sign off? Because I know you've got a patient in just a second. I'm very grateful for your time today. You've got about 2 minutes
Yeah.
until you need to pop off. So do you want to add anything else? Have I missed anything?
No. Yeah, no, I think that's all. I'd really like to do, you know, more Facebook Lives or more things like this focused on certain areas. So I'll let everyone know we'll do, you know, more targeted to estrogen, more targeted to things like endometriosis, PCOS, thyroid pause, gut microbiome. But now, you know, I know we wanted to brush on all of the topics here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, this Friday we're doing one on endometriosis, which is going to be,
Yeah.
we're getting to actually talk about the bacteria part of endometriosis, which is like so exciting because we've mostly talked about hormones. So
Yeah.
that's going to be a really good lot. And you know, what's interesting, a lot of women turned 50 to 55. They had endometriosis, they've had a hysterectomy, they were sterilized, then they got a hysterectomy, and then they end up piling on the weight. And they're typically the ones that have lots of diarrhea and pile on the weight. So maybe we can talk a little bit about that. That's fascinating.
Yeah,
so,
sure. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, Tiaan. And for everybody who's on, if there's something you want us to cover specifically, please let us know. Questions are fabulous because they help us actually engage more with you through it. So thanks again, Tiaan. And we'll see you online on Friday.
No worries. Thank you so much, Carrie.